Hello everyone. In this video, I would like to expand a little bit more on the topic of how you may or may not want to show up in this world as an awakened being. So I think this question gets posed quite frequently, because of how awakening can change you, um, and affect how you see the world as a result, and that can tie directly to what kind of work you might want to choose, and so how you show up in the world can change over time as a result of taking on this awakening journey. So of course, your state of consciousness dictates just about everything you do or not do, and how you may come up with decisions, what to do with your life, these kind of big questions, right? So your state dictates most, if not all, of that. Of course, I acknowledge that there are, potentially other limitations you have, like circumstantial limitations you might have, where you may want to do something else with your life, but you're not able to because you have some kind of restrictions, like materially speaking, or people around you, depending on your circumstance. So I'm just talking about the sort of if if other factors were kept optimal, like the material factors, how you would decide to live your life. That these decisions are largely based on your state of consciousness. So I want to start firstly acknowledge that I'm going to be comparing with some other teachers here, but I just want to start by acknowledging that I'm not trying to suggest that they have less value than me, because I think that's how this could come off as. So the other teachers that I've followed and continue to follow, some of them, um, their way of showing up in the world does have their own set of values. For one, they are reaching people that I'm not able to reach. Uh, so they're teaching people who are closer to where they are, right? And so this graduation process, and in order to reach more and more light, you do need people at different states to guide you along that. So that's one reason that there's value in having teachers at different levels. And the other value is that they obviously can reach a lot more people than I can. Right, my channel is very small, and I don't intend to try to market it or anything like that. I intend to keep it small, actually. So you could say in some ways I pull the other direction. I try very hard not to market myself, actually. So in that sense, the kind of impact I generate as a result is limited to a small number of people, right? In comparison to some of these other more well-known teachers that you may have also followed. So I acknowledge that being able to reach a lot of people has its own value, uh, especially if they could also start, crossing over with some of my messages. So that's why I want to start by saying, so my, you could say, critiques that follow here are not to dismiss those values that these teachers have. But I have to talk about these other teachers because there is quite a lot of difference in how we decide to show up in the world. And I just want to explain why that is a bit more. Because I think otherwise people may not understand. Because how can you be, claim to be the most realized being, but then choose to put yourself back into society and participate into society, right? Because I think the typical logical conclusion is that if you're very awake, then you would have no interest in participating in society, because there's just too much gap and differences, right? That part is true, but what is not true though is that, at least I might say, that I would want to remove myself from participation. So this is where I want to talk about in contrast with some of the other teachers, such as Shakyamuni. I think he's someone that shares a lot of common values with me, and he even talks about Christ nowadays. But he's a good example to use because he chose to basically teach in an ashram setting. I haven't been there myself yet. I still hope to one day. Hope to make it down there one day. It's just quite a big expenditure for me for the time being, at least. But I do appreciate that he has started talking about Christ's conscious as well. So, but obviously his way of teaching and showing up in the world is in an ashram setting, as well as online and posting these videos, right? That basically you can freely access. So I would say for most people, you can freely access his teachings, basically, um, free of charge. And so, but obviously, I'm choosing to still live in the world and to try to have a career in this world. So you see how there's a difference there between someone like Shakyamuni and myself, and I would say most spiritual teachers, um, do something similar to what Shakyamuni does, which is to be a full-time spiritual teacher. Again, I acknowledge the value in that because you're able to reach more people and spend more time with them. So there's value in that. Um, but I'm just saying that if one were to reach closer to where I am, though, this starts to change. And fundamentally, it's because you realize that what produces the greatest good is to put yourself back into society, because people need the light, and I would say especially the ones who are more disadvantaged and oppressed by our systems, economic systems, political systems. Those people need our help, or they need the help of enlightened beings, like truly enlightened beings. Um, and that's not something you could really do if not, at least not very well, if you are to be, you could say, stuck in an ashram all day or full time, right? Like it's just the physicality of that is just not happening. You're not exposing yourself to um, people like outside of your ashram, basically. Now this ashram could also be a virtual ashram, right? It doesn't have to be physical, but I think the physical is maybe easier to understand. Actually, the virtual ashram would be more flexible because you're not constantly having to be there full time necessarily. You can be more flexible with your schedule, like in an online setting. So I would argue that the physical ashram setting is more restrictive and has um, more the flavor of like keeping you stuck there along with your followers. Do you get what I'm saying? And largely removed from society. And I would argue that a lot of the marketing strategy is also geared towards that, is to sort of escape from or leave the toxic stuff behind and try to like establish like your own like kingdom of heaven, right, in an ashram or like the motivations are um I can see the goodness in the motivations of that, and myself at times would be drawn to that kind of environment as well. But after contemplating on this matter over time and just going through the world, like experiencing the people and how things really are in our society, listening to the news, of course, and just paying attention to the news, you realize that a lot of people are struggling, and struggling in a way that is not really necessary in a lot of cases, if not most cases, actually. They're struggling because of generally bad decision making from people in positions of power, whether it's like their boss or the politicians that are, you could say, making decisions. Um, they're not necessarily, these are not generally people that are struggling because they don't want to work hard and just like try hard. So, and I come across that both just going through people in my city, as well as just watching the news and blog posts, like video blogs and stuff like that. And so the conclusion, though, from seeing all this is that the only way I can help these people somehow is to put myself back into the world, right? Back into, you could say, this dream world. Um, so despite me saying that it's a dream world, the suffering, people suffering, is still very much real. Um, and from this level of conscious, the will of God is to help alleviate that to the extent possible. Now, of course, it can be difficult to do something like to feel like you're able to make much of an impact if you're just doing it by yourself. Because I do get pushbacks when I try to push back on, you could say, corrupting powers and corrupting forces. Um, it's hard to do that on your own sometimes, and that can make you feel, not wanting to keep going, perhaps, especially if you're just starting out with doing this kind of work. Um, so I would say having allies can be very helpful with that. If you're someone who thinks like this or want to think more like this, and you could say generate more good in the world, and shining your light. So I guess what I'm just trying to say to summarize is that in an ashram setting, I would say at a high level, what ends up happening is the teacher and the followers are kind of stuck in that physical location. I may not know the details of their arrangements, but it seems like to me they're just mostly spending their time at the ashram. I could be wrong about that, but that's just how what I'm gauging from these online videos that they release. Right, I don't have inside information. So, but how God sees things is that once you become like more fully realized, what generates the most good is to put yourself back into the world and to shine your light in various situations, through interacting with people. And the main way to do that is, of course, to find some kind of work in society. So again, not being a full-time spiritual teacher. Like you can still teach about spiritual teachings to people if you want to, but I'm saying in order to shine your light in the world, like more, you could say more optimally from God's view, is to put yourself back into some kind of work in the dream. Now, of course, I'm not advocating for something that's going to cause you a lot of suffering, because I would say most jobs are not very compatible with awakened beings, and I myself have struggled a lot with this. So I'm not arguing for you to like suffer a lot just to put yourself back in the world, because that wouldn't be very helpful either, right? Um, now, so there are some careers that I want to recommend for you to consider. If you're someone who's both already quite awakened or awakening to where I am, and you're also trying to figure out what to do about like your job, then this might help you. So I already mentioned law. This is a good field to enter because this mind is, you could say, very naturally good at gauging what justice means and what right and wrong means. So it's like, you might even want to start revising law as a result of it. But I'm not saying that's some kind of career that you should pursue, although that does exist. So this mind is naturally good at that, and so it's very compatible with a career in law. Of course, you would have to gauge if your particular country is compatible with you, because from my observation, someone like me would not be very compatible with the situation in the United States right now, where there's like a lot of corruption and um, collusion between the president and the judicial system right now. Like that would not be a very good environment for someone like me. But if you're in some of these other countries, like perhaps in Canada or some European country, then this may be a good career for you. And as well, because at least where I live, lawyers charge very high fees. This is a great opportunity to help people who can't afford such high fees. So there's like I would argue that there's still plenty of work to do in this field, despite what some people might say. Like they might start talking about how AI is taking over jobs, white collar jobs, including like lawyers. I think I can't say for sure, but it seems a little exaggerated to me because where I live, at least, there still seems to be a shortage of affordable lawyers. They're basically non-existent where I live. So you could say the supply and demand is still not quite being met. Um, and another career I want to mention is like dentistry, where there's a similar problem. Basically, a lot of dental work, when it gets more and more, you could say, specialized, it gets incredibly expensive. And it's like, I feel, again, this supply and demand is not being met in the market, where a lot of these specialists, dentists, they're able to charge very, very high fees for their services. Where I don't know if that's truly justifiable. Like something like an hour, or not even an hour's work, can cost you like $2,000. Of course, there's overhead, but again, it seems like the kind of fees they charge again is just very exorbitant, and there's lots of room in that field for competition. Um, of course, these jobs that I'm kind of proposing to you, they require very long period of investment into schooling, right? So you may not yet be in a position where you can invest in something like that. But it's just something for you to consider. Maybe plant some seeds in you, and you can ponder these things over time, right? Not something to like rush right away into. And another one would be medicine. I think is also pretty compatible with my state of conscious. It's about helping people and healing people, and you would have some, you could say, actual abilities as a result of awakening to Christ state. That would help people heal. Besides the like traditional methods, of course, we can't bypass that because you can't practice medicine without a license. You still have to follow the rules and what is prescribed in this world, unfortunately. So even if you have some extraordinary like abilities, healing abilities, you still can't really market yourself that way. Uh, if you are to pursue like an actual career in medicine. So those are the top three that I see are both in demand from like a supply demand perspective, and also being compatible with my state. So that's why I'm suggesting it to you. And there are also related jobs where you could become like a professor, like in those fields as well. If you become really experienced in those fields, you could start teaching in those fields, right? You could become some kind of policymaker as well in those fields, where we need people who can assess what the best policies are for the general population and to advocate for those things. Now, of course, I don't think my state would be very compatible with being a politician, though. But there are other ways you can influence politics. So for me, like I'm very interested in politics, but I don't see myself ever as being like a politician as a career. It's just way too public for someone like me. Um, but maybe you're different from me. I don't know for sure, right? I'm just trying to share about my state of consciousness, and if you're interested in trying to get to where I am. So again, these are just some things to consider. Of course, if you're someone like, especially if you're a spiritual teacher, you've already invested most of your career into that. Um, this may or may not be something you want to do, especially if you're getting older. But it's like, still, the door is always open for different options in your life, no matter how far along you've invested into a different career, right? You can still change. That's still possible. So I'm just trying to provide some different perspective on these, because I think people follow spiritual teachers, especially the really like public ones, but then they don't know what to do with their own life, like how to show up in the world and still be an enlightened being, right? Because yeah, it seems like there's some kind of uncertainty about, I guess, making your career choice compatible with being awake. Yeah, it's not easy. Like even these careers, it's not going to be easy because most likely the people you encounter, they're not going to be very awake. Um, you're basically the teacher at that point. So like many levels. Like you might be a student for like learning dentistry or the specific laws to start, but you're a teacher in the sense of like you're more spiritually aware. So I hope you get what I'm saying. That over time, as you enter into these fields, you do become like basically someone people can truly consult with and learn from, especially once you get some experience. And the careers I chose, these are also like helping professions where you can truly make a big impact on someone's life, especially the ones that are not easily accessible to people, but there's like a need for it. What I would consider like essential services, basically. So when you think about what's essential in life, like your needs, well, there's like food and shelter, right? And then there's stuff like medicine, dentistry, and things like accessing the law, or the justice system. So you can kind of cycle through like what kinds of things are things that people really need to live a good life, and what are the barriers to those things. Generally, it's like the cost. The barriers is the high cost of it. And so, from God's perspective, that's where I would want to spend the most energy on to try to alleviate this barrier. Do you get what I'm saying? So that more people can access these essential goods and services. Um, and as well, if you are someone who eventually become, you could say, well off as a result, you're more able to share that wealth with other people, right? So, you know, I've thought about this. Like the between trying to influence my government to redistribute like money, like how they tax people, like, that's almost impossible for me, at least as an individual, to influence. At least not in the near future. Between that option versus like me doing something on my own, like let's say generating an income on my own and then sharing that to people that are like in need. The second option is much more accessible to do, whereas the first option, it's kind of a gamble. Like you're gonna have to work through a lot of people, and there's already a system in place, right? It's not easy to change that. Like if you want to change the tax code or something, that's not easy for one person to do. Um, of course, you can still look into things like that. I'm not trying to discourage you if that's something you're interested. I'm just saying that the path of least resistance is actually to try to generate a good income through your work, and then if you want to share that with people in need, in addition to your career, it's much easier to do that, like the second option, than to try to influence your government. Of course, I'm not trying to discourage people from getting to politics here. Like, don't take this the wrong way. Myself, I still plan to be very engaged in politics. I'm just saying the sort of trying to move the needle in that is like really hard compared to you know doing things that are within my abilities and capacities to do. So I hope that makes some sense in terms of why I've chosen to do things this way. Um, of course, there are other reasons. Like I cannot be too public. Some of those, um, you may be able to guess why that is. My state is just not. It's still very far away from people in general, and so the likely outcome is I'm just not gonna have too many followers. As a result, like it's kind of like a pyramid almost. Like you're gonna have more people who are starting out in spiritual work, then you have people, reaching a lot of light, basically. So it's like there's less and less people once you get the closer you are to God. There's less people there, at least for now, for the foreseeable future. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. Again, I'm not trying to deny the value in the work of, say, someone like Shanamurti. I think he's doing a really good job there. So I'm not trying to tell him what to do here. I just wanted to share my perspective and try to explain a bit better why I've chosen this path instead.